Testing. Testing. 1 2 1 2.
Let's do this. This is a podcast from the Bray Drugs Awareness Forum.
Hello, I'm Ger Rowe from the Drug Education and Prevention Project at Bray Youth Service, working on behalf of the Bray Drugs Awareness Forum. In this, the third episode of our podcast series, we'll be looking at services in Bray that have to deal with substance misuse issues, and particularly asking how they are coping in the current global pandemic situation. For this episode, Danielle O'Brien and I spoke to Anne-Marie McMorrow, Service Manager at the Bray Women's Refuge.
Okay, so my name is Anne-Marie McMorrow. I'm the manager of Bray Women's Refuge and all that entails. So we operate a refuge. It's at the moment, because of COVID, it's a 4-unit refuge for providing crisis accommodation for women and children who are experiencing domestic violence. We also offer court support services. Again, because of COVID, that's restricted now. In that we don't offer court accompaniment, but we still offer all the supports around women applying for orders in relation to keeping themselves safe. We also have an outreach service, which is considerably busier than it's ever been, which covers pretty much most of Wicklow. So when you're not in refuge, you'll be supported by the outreach team. So the geographical area is Wicklow, south and southwest, and then the actual west of the county, over the hills and far away, is supported by another refuge.
So is substance misuse an issue that the refuge finds itself having to deal with?
Well, we have always known that drugs and alcohol were contributory factors to domestic violence, and whether that be through use by the alleged perpetrator or as a coping mechanism perhaps by women. Older children might obviously or might also turn to drugs and alcohol if that's their home lived experience, where domestic violence is an issue that hasn't been addressed. So in all, it's a fairly significant, drugs and alcohol and substance misuse are fairly significant elements of domestic violence and the situations that come from that.
How has the current COVID pandemic situation affected the service and your service users?
Well, COVID has had such an impact, it's almost impossible to list all the detrimental effects it has had. So the biggest one for us as a refuge is that we have had to reduce our capacity by our accommodation capacity by 43%, which means we've gone from a 7-unit refuge down to 4 to facilitate social distancing and regulatory requirements. Because we're a communal refuge, we have a shared kitchen and a shared sitting room. So to make social distancing work, we've had to reduce our numbers down, which has been really detrimental. It's sort of, it goes against the grain because we spent such a long time building up the service. We've only recently, in the last 2 years, renovated our service and increased the capacity, which was a need that was identified long ago. So it's heart-rending that we've now had to reduce down. But look, in relation to refuge, we're still there. We're still operating. I know some of the other communal refuges around the country aren't in that position. They don't have the space to socially distance, so they've had to reduce their numbers right down to minimal. So in that sense, we're lucky. COVID has, for us, been, as I say, destructive in our capacity. It's been destructive in the effects it's been having on families with the various lockdowns and restrictions and loss of employment and just general, I suppose, negative impact it's had on society everywhere. I think domestic violence has found its way to the fore in lots of home lives where it might have previously been rumbling under the surface but nobody really addressed it. Now it's to the fore. More people are at home, more stressors are becoming apparent, and stressors will always add to situations. So in that sense, it's been really, really difficult. And then on a more sort of personalised note, it's been difficult on the staff team as well, because everyone has families, everyone has homes to go to, everyone has children. So although children are back in school now, which is great, but it's been quite difficult for the staff team as well to remain as sort of positive and passionate about domestic violence as they have been, and they've been incredibly flexible, which is great for us. The impact it's had on the service is that the cases are far more complex. There's far more resources put into cases than previously might have been the issue, because we've had to reduce our capacity. We've almost had to increase our risk assessments to be able to offer crisis to the crisis, whereas previously we might have been in a position to offer a small level of respite. Now it really is crisis, so they're the cases we're assessing as in need of refuge, and they're the cases, the families who are coming through our doors. So in that sense, the complexity has increased, and that means the use of drugs and alcohol is far more present than it might normally be.
So in your experience, have you found that wider family life is affected by a person's misuse of drugs and alcohol?
Yeah, I think the answer to that question is definitely yes. It's, as I said, we have always as a sector recognised drugs and alcohol as contributory factors to domestic violence, and you can see it when families are coming through. You can see it in sometimes the generational aspect of families coming through the refuge, that we're supporting young women now who we may previously have supported as children themselves when they came in with their mother, and the issues are just cyclical. We know that domestic violence is a pattern of abuse, but that abuse is cyclical, and it's until that cycle is broken, and that often, family drug and alcohol use becomes normalised, and that's then becomes part of their ongoing cycle. So it's a difficult one to address and break.
Is drug-related intimidation an issue that your service would be aware of?
I think we've certainly had a number of, now possibly not recently, but certainly we've had a number of young women who have experienced domestic violence where drug debt has been a significant part of that. We've also had cases not necessarily from our home area but from further afield and in Dublin where intimidation and drug debt has driven women out of their homes. Maybe it's their children, maybe it's their partner, but it's definitely created an increased level of stress that has compounded domestic violence, and we have definitely seen a number of families where drug debt and intimidation is a significant factor.
Alcohol or drugs, what would be the biggest contributory factor in your experience of dealing with the consequences of domestic violence?
Alcohol is ever present. I think in a lot of the cases we would work with, whether it be in the woman herself or in the alleged perpetrator of the violence against her. Drugs have been a more recent addition to that. So around drug use by the alleged perpetrator, but then you've always had the potential for the woman herself to be sort of seeking support from GP and using prescription medication initially to come to terms with things, and then possibly overusing it. We also have a lot of situations where women become reliant on medication, and although it's not necessarily your classic drug abuse, in our eyes we'd be looking to somehow find support for them to be not so reliant on it maybe. But I think it's present a lot of the time.
Do you find that sometimes victims of domestic abuse can be in such a place that they find it very difficult to reach out and seek help?
Yeah, women in particular I think are concerned sometimes that they can't seek support because of the guilt and shame that might be attached to any degree of drug or alcohol use within their family circle, which contributes to the domestic violence, but actually that doesn't have any factor in ours. In our service, the only initial stipulation we would have is that our service has zero tolerance to the use of alcohol or the misuse of any drugs, whether they be street drugs or prescribed drugs. And we're very strict on that because, as I explained, it's a communal service. So, yeah, we need to be very conscious of the presentation of the people we accommodate and the impression that can then give to children in the setting. That's very important. So, as I said, we've reduced our capacity because of COVID down by roughly 43%, but the level of services haven't reduced. That's only a capacity figure, but we're still taking in a significant number of referrals, and they're up month on month. So the number of women we can accommodate, although the number is reduced because of our level of accommodation, we're actually able to process more families because, as I said, we're running a tighter risk analysis on admissions.
Do you think there are enough agencies in Bray to address the wider demands of associated implications from drug and alcohol abuse?
We certainly refer into various services in the town, and we're very seldom lost for a service to refer into. So in that sense, I believe there are sufficient, but I also think all services are under pressure, and if the degree of substance misuse increases, it's going to put all services under even more pressure. I know there are the various drug services in the town for adults and children, and then I know the mental health services are under increased pressure, but we I think are getting Jigsaw into the town soon, so hopefully that will alleviate a little bit and add another layer of support to the network of support organisations in Bray.
Finally, Anne-Marie had an important message for anyone who feels they may have to approach the Refuge for help.
Well, really, just as I've said, I'd like to encourage women or anyone experiencing domestic violence, even if they're young people in their home and are anxious about what's going on in their home, they're very welcome to ring our service to look just for a little bit of information and support. I'll give you the helpline number in a minute, but just to reiterate that the service is still there. Bray is so lucky that the service is in the town. We provide supports for the whole county and beyond, but yeah, it's in the town of Bray, which is a positive for the residents of the town. And just to say to women, please don't think you can't phone us or it's not abuse. If you feel afraid or in fear or anxious of what might happen, give us a buzz, because we are here to support anyone who thinks they might be experiencing domestic violence and abuse. Our 24-hour helpline number is 01286 6163, and we're also accessible through Facebook. Just send us a message on our Facebook page and we will respond within a couple of hours.
The Bray Women's Refuge operates a 24-hour helpline on 01 2866 163. They can also be contacted on their Facebook page. Search for Bray Women's Refuge. The service aims to support women and children experiencing violence and abuse. We'd like to thank Service Manager Anne-Marie McMorrow for taking the time to talk to us for our podcast series. This episode was produced by Danielle O'Brien of Bray Youth Service for the Bray Drugs Awareness Forum.
This is a podcast from the Bray Drugs Awareness Forum.